Hey guys, this is John, and I'm playing The1TrueKing13 in a 10 plus 10 game on chess.com. So, been a while since I played a climbing the rating ladder game. It's Friday night. I have nothing to do tonight, so why not play this player, 1TrueKing13. Obviously a pretty big rating gap right here, but this is an educational series, not trying to humiliate anyone with this rating gap. We're all just trying to get better. And even me, I like to practice good habits, even when I'm playing significantly down in rating. So you can always strive to play as best as possible in chess. Okay, so my opponent comes out with a King's Gambit. So I think I will decline this Gambit because the move I'm going to play here is something I've recommended before, possibly even in the Chess Fundamentals series. And I'm going to play in accordance with the principles of that Chess Fundamentals series, which I recorded back in 2015, 2016. So bishop c5. Now, first test for white is if white takes this pawn or not. They should not take the pawn because it runs into queen h4 check, followed by queen takes e4. It's one of the main virtues of this bishop c5 move. You occupy this diagonal, and that can create tactical problems for white. It can also strand white's king in the center. So white should play knight f3 here, after which I will play d6. I do believe taking the pawn is the strongest move, though. But bishop c5 is a good alternative. I think black equalizes with this move without too many troubles. And if you prefer a less sharp game, let's say, then this is a fine way to combat the King's Gambit. So this is 10 minutes with a 10-second increment. So we'll have plenty of time to discuss. And white correctly plays knight f3. Kudos to him. I'll play d6. So same thing. If this pawn gets captured on e5, if white goes capture, capture, and then knight takes e5, white again runs into queen h4, followed by queen takes e4. So that is not recommended. And I believe the main move here theoretically is c3, trying to expand in the center. And just to remind you guys, undefended pieces. I've been teaching a lot lately. I've been getting back to doing a lot of that. I have many students who are below, let's say, 1,400 or so. And I sound like a broken record at this point, but time and time again, those games are decided by undefended pieces. It's something, being aware of that is something that never ceases to pay off in chess. And I've mentioned before, I firmly believe this, it's very hard to improve in chess unless you get a handle on undefended pieces. And you stop blundering them, basically. And you recognize when your opponents are simply giving you material. Okay, so bishop c4, good developing move here. I think I'll play knight c6. I'm not too worried about knight g5. Oftentimes when this bishop makes an appearance on c4, people will instinctively try to stop knight g5, or they get nervous because white could set up that attack on the f7 point. But I always have knight h6 if white dives into the g5 square with the knight, so I'm not worried about that. I'm just going to make a good developing move, and then probably follow with knight f6 thereafter. Knight c6 makes sense, reinforcing e5, influencing the center. If I had played knight f6 instead, I would then have to calculate what would happen if white does double capture, because I wouldn't have queen h4 anymore. So just knight c6. I select these opponents at random, by the way. I just clicked on an open seek in the chess.com open challenges graph. So I know many of you have requested to play in some of these games and climbing the rating ladder. I may open it up to challenges at some point, but I like playing random people because I think it's a more authentic experience. If it's someone who watches my videos, I think they're going to be, for one thing, more aware of the stuff that I would like to highlight that's commonly happening at these rating levels. So bishop takes f7. I'm definitely going to take that. So white is playing to expose my king, but I think this is a incorrect sacrifice because white doesn't have many follow-ups here. I mean, there's knight g5 check, but I'll move my king probably to e7 just so that I'm not blocking my back rank, and then I'll continue developing. And it's very difficult to attack like that when you're just attacking with one piece. It's not even two pieces. You know, sometimes you can get the queen involved early on after you give a check like that, but I don't see an easy way for white to do it. I think queen h5 I can pretty easily parry a move like queen e8 even. This is after knight g5 check, king e7. So yeah, white is going to play knight g5. And e7 was my instinct here. F8 also seems like a normal move, but I'm a little leery of stepping onto the f-file. Note that white still cannot castle because of my bishop here. That would be illegal for white to castle. But white could post a rook there, so that's why I'm leaning towards e7. e8 also fine, I think. I could play g6 after white checks me on h5, but e7 feels like the best square. Maybe the only thing I have to watch out for is if knight c3 is played. Knight d5 could be on the table. So I should be aware of that. King e7, knight c3, knight f6 developing and trying to control d5, knight d5. Maybe we get a trade. Okay, then I'd have to move my knight. Maybe I will go for e8 instead. You know, e7 was the instinct, but maybe e8 is just better, just to avoid this knight c3, knight d5 business. Yeah, I think I will play king e8. No, white can't go here with the knight. That would straight up hang it. And if you play king e8, you do have to be aware of queen h5, but I've already said I'm going to play g6 against that move and just block. So let's see how my opponent follows up. I think white should develop now. You know, play a move like knight c3, maybe pawn d3. Also simply to allow the bishop to defend f4. But it's difficult. White only has 1 point for the piece, the sacrifice minor piece, just one pawn. And again, not enough follow-up ammunition here. So I'm back from some of my travels. I was at a chess camp the other week in Charlotte, North Carolina. That was a lot of fun. It was my last camp of the year. I typically teach like 2 chess camps every year, and it's always a good time. Charlotte, North Carolina has a great chess scene. Shout out to those guys, Peter Giannatos, Grant Owen, Dominique Myers, Mark Bernacki. If you guys are watching, thanks for the very fun week. But glad to be home. I think I'm going to be home for the next few months. I will probably go to the World Championship, though, in London in November. It's November 9th through the 27th, I believe. So it's a long match. The Carlsen Caruana World Championship match, much anticipated. So I hope to be out there for maybe 4 or 5 days. We might do a Chessable event. So we're looking at that probably on one of the rest days at the World Championship. So if you're going to be in London for the World Championship, maybe we can, I don't know, meet up, or you can come out to the Chessable event. I know a lot of you guys who watch this channel are based in England, so would love to see some of you guys. I've never been to a World Championship match before. I think that's on the bucket list for any chess player. So I'm very much looking forward to it. I think Fabiano probably has a 30 to 35% chance. That seems most reasonable to me. Okay, so he gave that check, but now where to put the queen? I'm rebuffing the queen. White can't continue moving forward. This square is covered by my knight. h7 is guarded. So probably f3 or h4 are the most logical for the queen, because both of those moves will help defend f4. But I see issues. You know, if queen h4, I can think about a move such as h6. And granted, I would not be threatening to take the knight with my pawn because my rook on h8 would be hanging, but that puts white in an uncomfortable pin. On f3, I could think about knight d4. That would be a common retort to that move, attacking the queen and also hitting c2. If white retreats to another square, another safe square, e2 or d1, I might even just take here. Okay, knight f7. So yeah, now the wheels are coming off entirely for white. Understandable that white wants to follow up that piece sacrifice aggressively, but the whole problem was that piece sacrifice, and it's very hard to adjust in chess, but this move is way too much. White's queen is under attack for one thing, so I could win a piece simply by taking the queen, and then after white takes my queen, recapture with the knight or the king. I'm up 2 pieces for a pawn there. I could also take right away if I wanted. That exposes my king somewhat, but I still keep the attack on the white queen. This is largely a matter of preference. I think the most clinical move is to take here and just take my 2 pieces and say thank you. And I think I'm going to do that. King takes f7, also perfectly fine though. Just a matter of preference. I would categorize myself as a fairly risk-averse player. If I get the advantage, I definitely don't like to give my opponent counter chances. And if we trade queens, that's a major signpost that the opponent is not going to have much counterplay. So yeah, white takes on d8 now. Let's stick with the king. I've already moved the king, so I'm not particularly worried about losing my castling right. And we are in an endgame now, or at least a queenless middle game. And when the queens get traded, it's usually not so bad to have your king in the center. There's less of a chance that your opponent's going to launch a direct attack and mate you or really harass your king. So not as big of a deal if you don't castle. In fact, in many positions, it's favorable if you don't castle. Your king will be centralized for the endgame. Okay, so rook f1. So notice how white's pieces over here are just not participating. White's already burned himself out with this attack. He's down material, but he hasn't got his queen side involved at all, especially these minor pieces. But this is a good move. White's defending the f4 pawn. I'm just looking at developing moves. I could play knight d4 if I wanted to attack this pawn. That actually looks pretty darn good. I think I'm going to do that because if king d1 to defend c2, I have bishop g4 check. I'd really like to bring that bishop out with a gain of time, so maybe I can lure the white king to d1. And by going to d4 rather than b4, not only is my knight centralized, but if white defends the c2 pawn by playing knight a3, I can chop that knight, remove the defender of the c2 pawn, make a trade when I'm ahead in material, and simultaneously remove the defender. If I'd gone to b4, that option would not be available because my knight on b4 would be in the way. So yeah, knight d4 looks good. I briefly looked at what happens if white takes on e5, opening the avenue for the rook, but I can go take this. Allowing the rook into f8 at the end is no big deal. I could even recapture and have the bishop defend the f8 square. I do like that my opponent is using time. This is not an opponent who's playing super duper fast, which is something I see constantly, really at every level. If you go back and watch my standard games, it's something I talk about just time and time again. People, by and large, do not use the time. They're playing longer time controls, but they don't use the time. But this player is. So I can tell this player is taking the game seriously, which is good. It's just that he came out too aggressive at the beginning. In a situation like this, there's nothing white can do. Black will win if black just plays logical moves. It's way too much of a material deficit. If you're watching this video and it's still unclear to you the result of the game, like what the result of the game will be, or you're wondering if a player can come back from a deficit like this, against logical play, not possible. That's one thing in chess. There's not very many Hail Mary comebacks, especially if you're facing a good player. If you're going lower and lower in rating, yes, you can come back from a deficit like this. So, if he were facing someone his own rating, it's not out of the question he could come back here. Happens quite a bit, actually. But it underscores the fact that in chess, you do have to be materialistic oftentimes. You have to take a strict accounting of the material. You have to be stingy about sacrificing material. So he played knight a3, but I got to take that piece, and now I'm going to recapture here, or take on c2 if he recaptures. And there are some very successful players who are less risk-averse. Like I said earlier, I'm more on the risk-averse side of the spectrum, but there are some players who sacrifice material liberally. I mean, even some historical players who reached the highest heights of chess. Mikhail Tal, for instance, known for making lots of sacrifices, speculative sacrifices. In the current generation, Simon Williams, as far as streamers go, is probably one of those guys who comes to mind immediately when you think of people who like to sacrifice. But if you get to the point where you're doing that and you're successful with it, you probably have a firm grasp of the fundamentals, and you know when it's acceptable to give material and when it's not, when you're just straight up lost if you lose enough material early on. So rook b1. Okay, so again, want to give my opponent credit. Like, he's seeing my threats. That move indicates that he saw that knight takes c2 was a threat, that fork. So if I take on c2 now, if I follow through, he plays king d1, and then there are 2 pieces under attack. My knight on c2 will be under attack, and so will my bishop. So I think I'm just going to retreat this bishop, bring it back to c5. I keep this threat alive. I'm up 3 pieces now. So if my opponent can just temper his, desire to attack early on versus recognizing the threats that I'm creating too, like, he's doing a good job actually of understanding what I'm up to. It's just that he invested way too much, way too quickly. So if he could pull back a little bit, play a little bit more sound chess, not launch premature attacks, I think he's got something to work with here. Not in this position, but his skill set, let's say. So let's see if he does something about this pawn. Okay, so he plays that. Now again, I could take here, king c2, and then I could pick up b4, actually. I could pivot back with my knight. I'm also kind of tempted to play bishop takes b4 to lure him into a fork. But bishop takes b4 is not so good in view of c3, which would fork my pieces. So yeah, knight takes c2 followed by knight takes b4 looks pretty ruthless and justified. And again, if this trade ever happens, I like that my bishop is guarding this square. So yeah, let's do this. So gaining a tempo on his king. Once that king is put on a light square, I can consider this move in the future. I won't do it next move, unless he goes to e2, in which case I will probably. But if he goes to d1, I'll take here, but I'll look to play bishop g4 next. Yeah, actually, if he takes on e5 now, bishop g4 is nearly mating. He'd have to play rook f3 to avoid a mate. King e1 and then knight c2 or knight d3. Okay, so he takes on e5, but yeah, this check. And if he plays king e1, it's lights out, so must play rook f3 if he wants to prolong this game. Okay, and to his credit, he does. So rook f3. Now that rook is pinned. I don't have to take it immediately. I'll probably just take back here. It's fine. Let's do that. Good to play such a move when you have your opponent in a mortal pin like that, because oftentimes what they'll do is they'll play a move like h3 to force you to capture. So they'll force you to play the move that you eventually want to play anyways, winning a rook for a bishop. So maybe I can induce that move, which isn't particularly helpful to white. Yeah, and he's running very short of time here too. Plays his bishop out, attacks this pawn. Okay, a couple moves come to mind here. Still not going to take this yet. I don't feel like I need to. Knight d3 looks pretty good. This pawn on a2 is hanging, but I think I should stop bishop takes e5. If he gets in bishop takes e5, he is hitting my rook in the corner, so always good to be aware of your opponent's threats, even late in a game like this. Knight c6 looks fine. Just pull the knight back and defend. Knight d3, I do attack his bishop, but after bishop c3, my knight's a little bit loose there. Could try to go for king c2 or something. I could also play knight e7, and after he takes, just then play rook f8. Pile up on this rook here. But nah, I'm just going to do this. I know some of you more cavalier opponents or players in the comments are probably thinking, come on, John, just get your pieces out and checkmate this guy. But playing principled chess, Okay, he hits my undefended bishop. Let's go bishop d4. I like offering this trade. Trades are good here. We're way ahead in material. That should be your mantra when you're way ahead in material. Trade down, reduce the opportunities from your opponent. There are some teachers and players who will say the opposite, by the way. I've actually been reading some stuff on chess improvement from some other coaches who say, okay, he's bringing his rook up here. I am going to go for this now, I think. Okay, take his rook. Who say that you should actually be looking for attacking opportunities when you're ahead in material, which is true. But I would say, as a general rule, trading down is not bad because you're reducing the chance that your opponent can climb back in the game. You're often reducing down to endgames that are easily winning. It is the default strategy, in my opinion, when you're ahead in material. Just war of attrition. I played my last move kind of fast, knight e7. That does let him take here, but I was going to gang up on this rook really heavily, also threatening to take with check. Also wanted to complete my development finally. So, okay, let's take a look at this game very briefly, but I've already identified the major area where white went off the rails, and that was this phase of the game right here. Just right after white developed the bishop to c4, he sacked on f7. Sometimes you can do this in the King's Gambit, but that's a heavy investment. White's investing a minor piece, 3 points of material for just a pawn. And, well, not just a pawn. I mean, he does get to expose my king a little bit. I can't castle anymore. But the main reason this attack fails is there's no follow-up. There's the one check, but there's not enough after that. It's very difficult to expect an attack to work when you're only working with 1-2 pieces, unless your opponent's king is very weak. And black's king is not weak enough here. If I didn't have g6 at my disposal, then yeah, that's a different story. Even then, probably king e7 is just going to be fine. But yeah, not enough of a follow-up here. So white should prefer something like knight c3, pawn d3 looks very normal to me. Defend this pawn with the bishop. Go from there. I also mentioned, I believe the theoretical continuation is c3 right here, looking to play d4, which is something I don't see a lot of players at this level doing, using their c pawn to prop up the d pawn. So looking to get those pawns side by side. So, something like this. I think black has enough counterplay here, but this is interesting. So yeah, after bishop takes f7, it's tough, I know, but white should continue developing. Like, try to get more pieces in the game. Knight c3, d3, have the bishop protect here. I know it's tough. When you sacrifice, you feel like you want to keep going forward, but you got to be objective in chess, and oftentimes that means pulling back and telling yourself that, okay, my attack seemed promising initially, but it's fizzled now, and now I have to switch gears. That's one of the most difficult things to do in chess. So yeah, knight f7, white's compounding this unsound attack with bishop takes f7 by now completely going off the rails. That move is just not going to work. 2 pieces under attack. I have my choice. King takes f7 is good. Take the queen, also good. And just win with the extra material. Like I said, white did some good stuff after that. It's just he dug himself way too big of a hole. But he did notice some of these threats, like bishop takes a3. He didn't immediately recapture. He recognized that this was a threat. He went here. Tried to set up some threats of his own, like bishop b2 attacking e5, but again, it's way too late. All right, so very big rating gap, but I know many of you guys out there, you viewers, are in this rating range. So keep working on your game. Check out the Chess Fundamentals series. I made that series with people like you in mind. And again, this is an educational series I'm making here, climbing the rating ladder. I'm not trying to humiliate anyone. Once more, we're all trying to get better at chess. So thank you to the One True King. I'll send him the link to this video if he's interested in checking it out. Yeah, not easy to play someone with that big of a rating deficit, disadvantage. So thanks everyone for watching. If you have any questions, let me know. And I'll be back again soon with another video. Have a good weekend, guys.